All right, new material, Chapter 8, Lesson 1. We're now going on to the executive branch, and we're starting with information about the office of the president and the vice president. The president of the United States of America, I guess you could argue, but I think you would have a tough argument against the fact that the president of the United States is the most powerful human being on planet Earth. Why? The United States is the most militarily powerful country, and it has a huge economy, and its soft power, things like its politics, its ideas, its music, its TV, its movies, influence, affect pretty much the entire rest of the planet. So, what are the qualifications to be the most powerful human being on planet Earth, Abby?
Be rich.
Let me ask that a different way. In Article 2 of the Constitution, it lists only 3 things that you absolutely have to be president.
35.
35.
Like a citizen.
Native-born citizen.
And you have to live there for 14 years.
Exactly. So, native-born citizen is important to understand. We covered citizenship way in the beginning of this course, so we'll review that. What you need to be is to be either physically born in the U.S. or its territories, which we call law of soil, or the child of at least one citizen parent, law of blood. So who can't be the president of the United States? Anybody who's a naturalized citizen. Naturalized citizens, of course, if Abby was born in France of French parents, she has no ability to be a citizen from blood or soil. She has the third way to become a citizen is through a legal process called naturalization. So she'd have to apply to be a citizen, live legally in the United States for 5 years. She gets a background check. She has to be an adult. And then near the end of the process, she'd take a citizenship test on U.S. civics and history. And if she could pass all that and prove that she could read, write, speak English, she could be a citizen through the naturalization process. But in that case, Abigail would never be able to be president of the United States unless we amend the Constitution as written.
Why? Is there a reason why someone who's naturalized can't be president? If they're legally a citizen and
Good
they went through all
question.
the steps to become a citizen.
It's because that's the way the framers wrote Article 2 of the Constitution. And the next question would be, well, why did they write it that way? I think the 35 years old is a little easier explained. Remember back then, 35 is a pretty mature age. Now, 35, you could be 35 and still living at home with your parents. Back then, the average age people start killing over it is 40, 50 years old. At 35, you're a mature citizen who has experience, background enough that the framers and the founders said, okay, 35 works for president. Lived into the United States for 14 years. That's a little trickier, but I believe the intent of the framers was to actually have Americans as their presidential candidates, then what? An Englishman. Because remember, the colonies have been there for a while, since at least the 1600s. So you had sort of American Englishmen, and they wanted to give the presidency, or the people who were qualified for the presidency, to have them be more Americans than, say, a straight Englishman or a foreigner. The last part, the native-born citizen, why a native-born citizen? I think it's tied into that idea too. If the question you're asking is that kind of outdated now, I personally feel it is. You know, I'm not sure why in the year of 2021 we couldn't have somebody who's a naturalized citizen as president. I don't think that's necessarily strange or disruptive, or
Especially along with the rule they have to have lived there for 14 years.
Sure.
So that kind of includes like being naturalized for 14 years.
Right.
Seems like a long time.
Right. I agree.
Can you ever see the 35 years old going down or maybe even going up?
Oh. Those are excellent questions. The way I'm trying to answer and think about that is, have I heard any interest ever in constitutional amendments to that effect? And I've never heard that. I've heard a good dozen things where people have semi-seriously proposed as constitutional amendments, like ending the Electoral College. People semi-seriously talk about that as a constitutional amendment. But I've never heard anybody say, yes, it's time to change that requirements in Article 2 and lower the age. But I don't see why not. I think any of those three qualifications are only important today in 2021 because they're in the Constitution. Could you change any of them without hurting the country? Sure. Is it going to happen? We don't amend the Constitution often because it's a very complicated process. And if you look at the country right now, it's not perfect split down the middle, but politically, we are very split. So you would need to find a constitutional amendment that people really, really, really agree upon. And if you just look at the Senate right now with a complete 50-50 split, that's indicative of a country where it's difficult to get people to agree on stuff, particularly the level you need for a constitutional amendment, which would be 2/3 of Congress, 67%, and then 3/4 of the states, 38 of those 50 states agreeing on something.
I can see them all changing eventually. It's gonna happen eventually.
I say this
100%.
I say this to my students a lot. Will they see it in their time? Maybe. Will I see it in my time? I'm not so sure. You're all going to live until you're 120, so you all have a good 100 years left to see the country change. Me, probably got about half that. So will you see these changes and amendments? Maybe. Will I? I'm not so sure. Okay, so you already know, hopefully presidential elections are every 4 years. Bam. So when's the next presidential election?
2024.
Exactly. The next is the bane of civics teachers everywhere, the Electoral College. Why do I call it the bane of civics teachers? First, it's pretty complicated. And second, it's clear we're not doing a good job on it, because I can talk to adult American citizens today, and I probably can't find 40% really understand and can explain the Electoral College. So I'm going to give it another shot this year. So what's the Electoral College? It is comprised of 538 electors. Great. How do you get the 538 electors? Each state in Washington, D.C. gets a certain number of electors. Great. What are those electors based on? The numbers of electors a state gets is based on its number of senators, easy, everybody gets 2, and number of representatives. A little more complicated because that's based on population. Each state gets a number of electors based on the number of representatives, based on population, numbers of senators, 2. Cool. And then Washington, D.C., since it does have the right to vote, does get the minimum number of electors, which will be 3. Clear as mud? This will help you out a little bit more. So, you look at this map, and what you hopefully see quickly is these numbers are numbers of electors. So, hopefully clearly, California has a lot of electors with 55. Texas is next with 38. Florida is next with 29. And we got some states up here in the Northeast like New York and Pennsylvania. Then the Midwest, the Ohios and the Michigans have higher number of electors. Why? It's really simple. That's where people live in the United States. So California has the largest population in the United States, so it gets the biggest number of electors. Then let's look at the states where nobody is. These big but relatively empty states in the Midwest. Your North and South Dakotas, your Wyomings and Montanas. Each of those states are physically large, but there's only like 7 people and a dog and a cat living there. So they get small number of electors. They only get 3 because they get the 2 senators, which each state gets, and they typically have the smallest number of representatives in the House of Representatives, which is 1. Does that make sense to you, Abby?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the number of electors you get. Cool. So if you do your math, 538. The easy way to count it up is add the number of senators, 100, number of representatives, 435, add 3 for little Washington, D.C., you get 538.
Does that ever change because of the fluctuation of like the number of representatives each state gets? Or is it always going to equal 435?
Right now, they keep the Electoral College stable with 538 electors.
But if the representatives is based off of like population, couldn't that like at least theoretically like change the number of electoral college?
Yes.
Okay.
Um,
Has it ever changed?
yes, over time. But what you see is it changed a lot in the period from the 13 original colonies as we gained states. Because you didn't just gain population, which adds electors, but you get senators too.
They had the electoral college back when the 13 colonies were made.
Not when the 13 colonies were made, when the original 13 states were organized under the United States Constitution. Yes, because as soon as the Constitution was written, we got this electoral college thing.
Mm.
So, the short version is, with the number of states we have, in the plan that each representative is supposed to be proportional, each representative is supposed to represent 700,000 Americans, and then population rises and falls in different states, the Electoral College stays relatively the same. You just see electors shift from state to state. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
People are leaving these states up here, and people are coming to these states here.
So if like magically like 15 million people appeared in Wyoming, the electoral college
Yes,
would go up?
it would have to, because those 15 million people would have to get representatives, which would change the composition of the electoral college, unless 15 million people moved from other states to that state. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's why I'm hedging on it. Other things that would definitely have to change the electoral college. Puerto Rico becomes a state. It would get electors in the electoral college. That would change the electoral college. Excellent questions. Right now, though, nail into your brain 538, because that's important to know, because you need to know 270 electors get you the presidency, which is what? More than half of 538, right? Advanced math? Cool. All right. Great. So what's my part? What do I do as a voter? Am I completely useless? Absolutely not. The way it works is each of the 50 states has their own election system. That is a power that the states have. It's not a federal government power that's reserved to the states. Each state has its own system of running elections. So let's talk about Florida. I'm a voter in Florida. I vote for candidate A or candidate B. Whoever gets the most popular votes from citizens like me in Florida, wins the popular vote, and then gets all of Florida's electors. So if I vote for candidate A wins the popular vote. Candidate A gets 27 electors. Candidate B gets a big, fat, sad 0. So even in a big state like Florida, which may have 10 million voters, if I just win by 1 vote, I get all 27 votes. Which it's not intuitive and it doesn't make sense. Some people would think, why don't you share them proportionally? or do something like that. But 48 out of the 50 states have a winner-take-all system. Whoever wins the popular vote in that state gets those states' electors. And then those electors would vote for that candidate who won the popular vote in that state. Does that make sense?
What is like the logical reasoning behind with the winner takes all system? What is the like explanation to why that makes sense?
Good question. Let's look at there are two exceptions. Two states, Nebraska and Maine, can and do split electors. So they do have a system which isn't purely winner take all. They will split the electors according to some proportion of how many popular votes the candidates win. I think the winner take all system is used because it's cleaner and it's easier. But you know what? I deserve a better answer than that, and I'm going to have to do some research. I don't know why, out of all the possible ways states could have done it, that 48 out of 50 states have chosen winner take all. One of the complexities is each state has its own election laws. So really, no kidding, Abby, 50 different states at points in their history made political decisions to go with winner take all. Why do they do that? I owe you some explanation. If I have to just totally force to guess, I think it's simpler, it's cleaner. It was probably used before in other political voting systems that they were used to, like when they voted for their colonial governments, and potentially historical from voting systems that they were used to back in England. Terrible answer, but that's the best I could do, because literally I can't tell you why 48 states picked the electoral systems they did. But if the question is, doesn't it make sense that you share these votes proportionally somehow? Yes. But then if you do that, the next question would be, well, why don't we just get rid of the electoral college totally and go with a popular vote? See what I mean?
Exactly, that's the point. I always struggle to understand why they implemented it in the first place. Like, it sounds like it was just useless to begin with.
No. I'm going to have to... All right. Try to do this simply. The United States is not a pure direct democracy. It's a representative democracy. Our framers made deliberate decisions to make sure we don't have a pure direct democracy. Why? Our framers were skeptical to the point of being scared of pure democracy. Why? There's some idea that if you just let the people make decisions, they're going to get it wrong. If you just say, okay, America, we're going to do what 51% of you want to do, what happens if that 51% want to do something wrong?
But then wouldn't that...
Hold on. So keep your question. So the framers deliberately created a representative democracy in which they avoid the problem of what they would call tyranny of the masses. There's a problem with the dictator telling you what to do. That's the people don't get any say at all. But there's also a problem if you have to do whatever 51% of your citizens want. Because 51% of your citizens might want something wrong. And then what happens to 49% of your citizens? So they say if you have this system where people do get to vote, but they vote for representatives who do the governing for them and potentially what? Are smarter, better educated, more attuned to governing, and who would hopefully, protect the minority from the tyranny of that 51%, the tyranny of the masses. So, why do we have the Electoral College at all? There we go. It's a representative democratic system where a lot of the framers would be blunt about it. They would say, you know, have you met people? Have you met your fellow Americans?
And that's why I think
They are a bunch of knuckleheads sometimes who can make poor decisions. So you don't go with just a pure popular vote. You elect this group called the Electoral College, who is more attuned to making better decisions for the whole.
but they are not doing anything. The
We'll get
electoral
to,
college.
we'll get to that in a second.
But also, if the thought process was kind of, well, we don't want 51% of people to make the wrong choice. Well, I feel like that's just kind of, well, they're like, well, we don't want to do it for the whole country, but we'll do it for every single state. So if 51% of people in this state say it's good, well, they're right, and that person gets all the electoral college votes. So it's basically just getting the broader 51% and putting it into all the different states. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So it's not even really.
That gets really technical again. If what you're saying is it's still a tyranny of the masses because the popular vote decides the votes in the Electoral College, you are correct. But with a big but. Big but. The big but is it wasn't necessarily designed that way. What do I mean? Today, it's certain state laws and almost traditions that you have faithful electors. What do I mean? What I mean is, if 51% of Floridians vote for candidate A, the expectation is those 27 electors vote for candidate A. Well, what if some of those electors don't? That gets into some more advanced civics that we don't cover here, but I understand your question.
I didn't even know that was a possibility. That the
Yes.
electoral college people could be like, no, we actually don't want to go with
they
the
call
popular
that, I think,
vote.
faithless electors, and there's legal issues with that too.
But do they even do that anymore? Like, when was the last time someone was like, actually, no thanks?
Don't know. It's more research you're having me do. I got to do some extra work to be able to do the AP civics class and a basic civics class. But we'll hold that thought, and we definitely see some of the problems with the Electoral College. All right? But the short version is, the framers wanted a representative democracy, not a direct democracy. What are some of the ways you can see that? Well, our whole system of representation in the House of Representatives and Senate, proof of representative democracy. Another one is the Electoral College. Steve Bienkowski's vote is not what elects the president. Steve Bienkowski's vote is used to basically tell some electors how to vote in this second layer, the Electoral College, how they're supposed to vote for president.
What if only one person voted? And the whole United States, what would happen?
I
Or what
get
if
that.
no people voted?
I get that question every year.
Really?
Yes, I do. Someone always asks me, well, there's always these questions I always get. And that's one I always get when we talk about elections. And I don't think the Constitution addresses that because, let's face it, we're a country of 340 million. You call half of that, we have 170 million voters. You're probably not going to get to the point where out of 170 million voters, nobody votes or one person votes.
But you can still answer theoretically.
Um,
Like, if one person voted, is that one person's vote the deciding vote?
The only way I could answer is there is a provision if somebody doesn't get enough electoral college votes, or if there's a tie in the electoral college. And that provision is it goes to the House of Representatives. So my assumption would be if somehow there's this massive lack of voting and nobody votes, then nobody has the 270 votes in the Electoral College, then the House of Representatives would vote for president.
But what if only one person lived in the United States? Then whatever state they live in would have all of the Electoral College votes.
If one person lived in the United States, then that person would be
Oh yeah, you're right.
the
There
senator,
wouldn't be any-
representative, the president, and everything else. All right, cool. Back to a little more basic civics. You do need to know this electoral college idea, this electoral college. Oh, and other reasons why you have the electoral college, there's a big concern for these states' political power. Because you look at this big, huge swath of the country, you could argue that if you didn't have the electoral college, they would have no political power. Why? Because nobody lives there, they have no votes, and you hear this argument today. You hear the argument today is, well, it's, these people and these people. And here, pick the president. What I mean is true, because this is where people live. There's nobody in here. The only way to keep these people, politically viable in presidential elections is through the electoral college system. If you just went for a pure popular vote and then you mapped it, yeah, who picks the president? The people living here and the people living here. Now the argument is that's because that's where people are actually living. Yeah. So to keep these people somewhat engaged and valuable in the political process, some people say you have to keep the electoral college, or nobody's going to care about North, South Dakota, Wyoming.
But I would say that they only have probably there's about 20 electoral college votes for 6 different states up there.
Right.
Regardless, those more populated states are going to be the ones who make the most impact on the election anyways. 55.
Right, yes and no, but there's this second issue, which again, we weren't going to go into. All right. So you're running for president. You're like, I have to win California. That's 55 electoral college votes there, right? Yes, but, and the big but again is, for years, California has been going Democratic. So if you're the Republican candidate, do you spend time, energy, effort, and money trying to win California? And typically the answer is no. Even though it has 55 electoral college votes, you can't win there because it always votes Democratic. Similar to Texas, Texas has been a little closer, but Texas typically goes Republican. So if you're a Democrat, do you try to win Texas? If you know you're not going to win Texas, are you going to spend your valuable time, energy, effort, and more than anything else, your money in Texas? Probably not. So, which become the states that really matter? Your swing states. Florida's kind of a swing state. We've been voting traditionally Republican, but it's only kind of recently, and it sometimes gets really close. So you spend your money in these swing states that you may actually be able to win, that Democrats or Republicans don't always win. That's the other complicated part. Does that make sense?
I just don't see how that would change if the electoral college went away. The candidates would still be okay, California, still the popular vote in California is going to go Democratic. So I would still, assume they would spend more time in the smaller populated states. I don't think that
people would say
would
no.
change.
People would say if it was a pure popular vote, you'd go here, 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 and here, and that's it. You would never go in here because nobody lives there. The other argument and another big problem with the Electoral College, if you really get into math, As a resident of Wyoming, if you wage your vote against a resident of California, your vote means a lot more because there's a tiny number of you and you get a tiny number of electoral college votes, sure, but there's a huge 40 million people in there, and even though they get a ton of electoral college votes, proportionally, a person from Wyoming or North Dakota or South Dakota, their vote is worth more than somebody from California when you work the math out proportionally. AP Civics, we're going to push on. So this you have to know, 270 electoral college votes to win. So you campaign, you win popular votes in states. Those popular votes, again, typically winner take all. You get that 55 votes for winning California. You get that 38 votes for winning Texas. You get those 27 votes for winning Florida. First candidate to 270 votes wins. Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Get off the electoral college. If you win, you get 4 years in office. Wonderful. Who was our first president, Abigail?
George Washington.
Of course. Do you know how many terms he served?
4?
He served 2 terms.
Oh.
Could
Who
he have
served 4?
We'll get to that. Could Washington have served 4 if he lived long enough, if nothing else strange happened? George Washington was a huge, big hero and celebrity for our early Americans. He was Taylor Swift combined with Tom Brady, combined with Beyonce Knowles. He was a superstar. He was America's hero. He easily won the first election. He easily won the second election. So he starts saying to himself, I could probably be president as long as I want. But that's not the point of America. Because if I just keep running for election and I'm president as long as I want, until I die maybe, I'm a king now. I'm King George Washington I. Bow down, Americans. He realizes this. He realizes our system is not created to elect kings or dictators, so he only serves 2 terms. That becomes a precedent. That becomes a tradition, but that isn't in the Constitution. The Constitution, as written in 1787, has nothing about term limits. But presidents follow George Washington's tradition, and there's presidents who flirted with, gee, I'd love a 3rd term. And they probably had political reasons for not doing it too. But we want to just think about the fact that no president went past the 2 terms until this guy, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. We're going the 30s into the 40s. FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, this cat here. He does get elected 4 times, like Abby said. He really doesn't serve that entire time. He dies early in his 4th term. But Americans see Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and as much as Americans clearly loved him because they voted for him 4 times, a lot of Americans say, gee, did we flirt with becoming a dictatorship? We had this guy serve almost 16 years. Is that, again, what we want? We've had this Washington tradition of presidents only serving 2 terms. How do we fix this? We're going to make it a law. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, crippled from polio. I'm not sure technically you'd say he's our only really handicapped president, but he was crippled from polio, so he spent a lot of his time in a wheelchair. He could get around some degree in crutches, but he suffered from polio, which is a disease that has been eradicated through the use of vaccines. But he suffered from that medical tradition. Great. So, concerned about this idea that we don't want a president having so much power that they become a dictatorship, we have the 22nd Amendment limits a president to 2 terms and 2 terms only, the way I remember it. 222. 22nd Amendment limits the president to 2 elected terms in office. There's a little technicality in there that you could serve more than 8 years as president if you start off as vice president and your president dies. You serve a couple years of their term. You're still eligible for running for president twice, so you could technically serve 10 years. Has that happened? No. Could it happen? Sure. Salary and benefits. The president makes pretty decent money. $40,000 plus travel and other expenses. Comes to around $450,000. Is that Tom Brady money? No. Is that Jay-Z money? No. Is that pretty good compared to Mr. Biankowski's paycheck? Yes. Is that about 12 Mr. Biankowski paychecks a year? Sure. But yeah, presidents, are they really, tremendously paid so they get super wealthy? Absolutely not. A fairly successful business person or a dentist or a doctor or a lawyer could easily make more than what the president makes a year. So, president does get that paycheck, gets other benefits too. You live in the White House and you have a staff of 80. You think a president ever has to do laundry, clean up dirty dishes, iron, make a bed? Absolutely not. Staff of 80. A chunk of that staff is provided by the United States Navy. So you want to cook for the president? Join the Navy. The Navy cooks for the president. President flies around in helicopters. Marine Corps runs his helicopters. Cool jet. Air Force runs the jet. That allows him some safety and security in travel. And the jet acts as a command center. So in a horrible situation of a massive nuclear war, the president can be thrown onto his jet. The jet goes up in the air, circles around while the president tries to fight that war. Questions?
The people that pay, the staff, does the military pay the staff? Does the president pay the staff? Or does, just the government pay the staff?
They're employees of the United States government.
Okay.
So some will be employees of the executive branch, probably the White House office. The Navy folks would be paid by the Navy. The Marines and Air Force folks are paid by the Marines of the Air Force.
I feel like that's a lot of money going just for, the president's chef.
Oh, absolutely. It is the paycheck to take care of a president is low. Let's face it. $400,000 a year, call it $450 with expenses. That's not a lot of money. But all this? Sure. This plane is like $1 billion worth of plane, and it costs a ton of money to operate it. His armored vehicle, the Beast, just one car, that's like a $2 million car. 80 people's salary? Sure. This gets expensive to take care of a president. Absolutely. And presidents get paid for life. They get Secret Service protection for life. So President Abigail gets voted out of office, she will still get Secret Service bodyguard protection for the rest of her life. So while an individual president doesn't get paid a lot of money, it isn't Tom Brady money. It's not Mike Trout money. It's not Beyonce money. No way, not even close. But over the long term, if you've committed to flying somebody around in this bad boy, that's expensive. Think of all the gas this thing burns, the staff of people to keep it up and operating. Tremendously expensive. Yeah.
Stupid.
Are they worth it? Most powerful person in the world has to be able to do these jobs. Some of this stuff you really need to do. Do all countries do this? No. Some countries, their president or prime minister lead relatively humble and normal lives, particularly in Scandinavian countries. They walk to work, no real bodyguards, low pay, things like that. But that's not how we work. The vice president, same qualifications as the president. Why does the vice president have to meet the same constitutional requirements as the president?
Because they could be the president.
Exactly. And that's one of their two big jobs. They take over, they succeed the president. If the president is incapacitated, dead, sick, has a stroke, goes cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, or retires, resigns or is impeached and convicted and thrown out of office. So the vice president takes over in any of those cases. The other constitutional duty of the vice president, break 50-50 ties in the Senate. So the vice president does run into the Senate with the magic gavel. He or she now presides over the Senate, and where she's really going to matter now is breaking 50-50 voting ties in the Senate, because there's 100 of them. And oddly enough, this Vice President Harris, is probably going to have to do that a lot. Why? It just so happens we have a 50-50 party split in the Senate. 50 Republicans, 50 Democrats. So I think Vice President Harris has the chance of being a busy vice president wearing that tie-breaking vote hat. Oh, by the way, that's her mansion. Pretty nice.
It's cute.
It's cute. It's a lot less gaudy than that huge monstrosity of the White House, right?
So the vice president doesn't live in the White House?
She does not. She has her own little mansion on this little Navy base.
Do all the vice presidents live there in that house? Or can they choose?
I will say this. I don't know the history of the vice presidential mansion. I'll say, I'm sure through my lifetime that's where vice presidents have lived. Whether it was somewhere else earlier, I don't know. Can they choose? Sure. There was a big debate in the beginning of Trump's presidency. He was saying he didn't want to live in Washington, D.C. and didn't want to live in the White House.
I wouldn't want to.
So there was some concern in the beginning of his presidency that he wasn't going to do it, but he finally did. And as far as I know, there hasn't been any presidents who are like, yeah, I'm not living there.
Why does it matter? Why do they have to live in the White House? Or like,
They don't have to.
but like, why is it like
Ah,
looked down upon if they don't?
I don't think it's looked down upon. So you're in charge of the president's Secret Service detail. So for 100 years, 140 years, the Secret Service has been protecting the president who lives and works in the White House. You establish infrastructure, routines, everything you know about protecting the president is centered around the fact that here's where the president lives. And now a president gets elected and he's like, I like Honolulu, Hawaii. I'm the president. I've read the Constitution. It doesn't say anything. I'm going to live in Honolulu, Hawaii. So what are you going to do now? All that infrastructure, all those plans, all these people, all this stuff you've been doing for 140 years, now you're going to have to do in Honolulu, Hawaii. And all the other stuff too. The planes, the helicopters, the entourage, the aides, the equipment is all going to move from the national capital in Washington, D.C. to Honolulu or Billings, Montana. You know? Now what happens in a nuclear war? What happens in emergencies? Are these places going to need a bunker? Because the White House has this like bomb-proof bunker dug underneath it. Now this dude's house in Billings, Montana, do you have to do the same thing?
No.
You know, and just think the opposition. You're the new president, and you're like, I want to live in Milton, Florida. I'm the opposition party, and I'm like, oh, look at this new president, Abigail. The White House is not good enough for her. Look at the money it's going to take you, the taxpayer, to move President Abigail from Washington, D.C. to Milton, Florida. She is already spending taxpayers' money and wasting it on moving all this stuff. Let's have interviews. Yeah, hi, I work in Washington, D.C., and my family's been taking care of the president for 40 years, and my kids go to school here in Washington, D.C., and now what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to move to Milton, Florida?
Is the president, like, could a president just be like, I don't want to live in the White House. I don't want to have the Secret Service follow me around. I don't want to take all these big planes to go places. I just want to live normally while also being the president. Could they do that? Like, or do they have to have these, like, protections?
It is not in the Constitution. It's tradition and precedent. So, if you got elected and your staff is around you, and you just lay down the law and you're like, look, I've read the Constitution. I don't have to do any of this stuff, so I'm living in Milton, Florida, and I'm going to work remotely. I'm going to take meetings on Zoom with my cat in my lap. And you guys are all just going to have to figure it out. That would be tough, but constitutionally you could do it. Your vice president, your advisors, and your cabinet's going to be pulling their hair out of their head, begging you to please go to the national capital.
Well, I would go occasionally just to do stuff.
Presidential secession. Who takes over when people start dying or having to lose office? This you need to know. This is the type of thing that's in the EOC every year. President, vice president. Who follows the vice president?
Speaker of the House.
Who follows the Speaker of the House?
The Speaker of the Senate person.
President pro tempore of the Senate. Then it goes into the president's cabinet. We'll talk about the cabinet in the next lesson, but the cabinet's the president's 15 senior advisors that run 15 big offices or departments in the executive branch of the United States government. So it goes from the senior cabinet member, who's the Secretary of State, to the junior cabinet member, who's the Secretary for Homeland Security. So that establishes presidential succession. For a lot of reasons, and particularly military reasons, we have to know who the president is at any time. Military big reason, the president is the commander-in-chief of the military, so the military are going to be looking for orders from the president of the United States, particularly in something like what? An attack on the United States, particularly a what? A nuclear attack on the United States. The only ones who could order the military to use nuclear weapons is the president. 25th Amendment. Okay. So we all know today that the vice president takes over. That wasn't clear earlier in our history. Why? Because the Constitution was vague. The Constitution, when written, didn't say yes. If the president dies, the vice president takes over and is the president. The first vice president who had to deal with this, John Tyler, his president, Harrison, was first president to die in office. So Tyler's like, hey guys, am I the president now? Or am I just acting president? Do I need to run for office? Do I need to be elected? What's the law? And the advisors are like, we don't know. We read the same Constitution you read, and it's vague, it's unclear. So Tyler just says, all right, I'm making a decision. Swear me in, I'm the president. That doesn't get fixed for good until the 25th Amendment, which actually lays all this stuff out. It says, yes, president can't do the job, vice president takes over. Then how do we get a new vice president? 25th Amendment describes that process. President Abbey, you get to pick a new vice president. Boom. So you pick somebody for vice president. Are you done? No, that person has to get confirmed by Congress. So it's a two-step process. Another check and balance in our systems of check and balances. So if you're a vice president who has to be president, you are the president. 25th Amendment says so. You fill that vice presidential spot by choosing somebody, appointing somebody who has to be confirmed by the Senate.
Would that still happen
Confirmed by Congress.
if the president died the day before the new president gets sworn in? Would they still have to be okay?
That vice president would take over until the second the person who won the election is inaugurated. Yes.
So they would also have to choose a new vice president in that time period? Even if it's the next day,
I think it would be smart for that person to pick a vice president, because you could argue, who knows what can happen. Now, would that vice president be able to get confirmed by Congress? Probably not. But if you are, I think if you're a vice president who cares about the country, you would become president, appoint a vice president, and let Congress start doing its job of confirming that person, even if the new president's taken over in hours. The president has a stroke. The president is in surgery. The president can't do their job for a short period of time or a long period of time. The vice president takes over. If it's a short period of time, for example, here in this picture, there's an assassination attempt on President Ronald Reagan. The gunman's under this pile of police and Secret Service. He winds up shooting a Washington, D.C. police officer, a Secret Service agent, and a member of the president's staff. As the shooting's happening, of course, the Secret Service just grab the president, throw him in the back of the armored limo, and they peel out of there. President Reagan's like, man, you guys threw me in that limo so hard, you broke my ribs. So the Secret Service agent's like, uh-oh. Tears his shirt open, he has a bullet hole in his chest. So, of course, they got to rush President Reagan to the hospital where he has immediate emergency surgery. Of course, he can't execute he's fine. He gets out of it. Of course, he can't execute the duties of presidency, so the vice president takes over until the president can do the job. Then there's another weird situation. What if the president can't do their job because maybe their medical issue to include some sort of mental condition? The 25th Amendment has a plan for that. Basically, the vice president and the cabinet talk and vote. And if they vote that the president can't do their job because they've got a mental issue, they tell Congress that fact, and then the vice president takes over. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. You did hear talk about the 25th Amendment at the end of President Trump's presidency, because there's some people were concerned that he could not execute the duties of president. But of course it didn't happen. Oh, and to place this in history right now, because who knows when you're watching this video, today is Sunday, the 14th of February, 2021. The day prior, the Senate just voted on the president's impeachment trial, and he was found not guilty. So he was acquitted of the crimes of basically inciting people to riot and attack the national Capitol on January 6th in order to prevent the Senate from counting electoral college votes saying that Joe Biden was the president. So history's been happening all over the place this year, 2020, going into 2021.
So, like, as part of that, like, how did they acquit him? Like, what was the anti-argument?
The defense.
Yeah.
They had arguments. The first argument was the Constitution really doesn't provide for impeaching an ex-president. That was part of the argument. Other part of the arguments were it's bad for the country. Another part of the arguments was he is just not guilty. The defense argued that anything the president said is covered by the First Amendment, and he has the First Amendment right, just like any other citizen, to say things. They argued that anything that could be construed as incitement to that riot was the president exercising his First Amendment rights.
But you can also get arrested for making threats or, like,
absolutely,
you can get in trouble for, they always use the example, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater.
Which is a terrible example legally, but yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So yes, I'm not telling you that everybody, including lawyers, believes the president's defense theories were correct. Of course, people argue strongly that the defense was wrong in their arguments. And the vote was 57 to 43. So 50 Democrats and 7 Republicans said the president was guilty. 43 only Republicans said the president was innocent. But as you already know from impeachment, which we learned a couple chapters back, you need a vote of 2/3. It would have taken 67 senators to say the president was guilty. And in this case, he was an ex-president, so could they throw him out of office? No, because he's out of office. They could have potentially said he was ineligible for running for president again, because there's people who believe that Mr. Donald Trump now is going to run for office again in 2024.
It's just kind of like that system kind of doesn't make sense to me, because I don't think crime is subjective, and I don't think it's like, oh, well, if, like, you wouldn't be like, oh, if, 2/3 of these judges on this murder trial don't say that this murderer is guilty, then they get to go free.
Well, we know how. I think the first thing you need to do is realize that while the impeachment process, to include the trial in the Senate, has a lot of features that look like a trial, it's still not a trial. And the biggest one that's important here is if Abigail Biankowski gets arrested for a crime and you have a trial, it takes a unanimous decision. It takes 12 of those 12 jurors to say guilty. Not judges, not the prosecutor. 12 out of 12 jurors who are just citizens just like you, Abby, to say you're guilty of a crime. So already the Senate trial is different than a criminal trial. Yes.
But with the added element of politics, obviously people are going to decide a very big decision just based off of political belief, which goes into is that a really lawful decision, or is it just a biased decision, which isn't fair at all?
I think the framers did their best. And I think they realized it would be difficult because basically, Abby, what you're saying is a juror in a jury trial is supposed to go in there and be neutral, nonpartisan, and just look at the evidence. And if the evidence convinces you they're guilty, say guilty. If there's no evidence, you say that person's innocent. You're arguing that in a impeachment trial in the Senate, a Republican is going to find a Republican president not guilty, and a Democrat's likely to say they're guilty. And that's basically what happened in every impeachment trial we've ever had.
Yeah.
They were generally voted on party lines. This one was a little different because, like I said, 7 Republican senators voted to convict Donald Trump in this latest impeachment trial. But yes, it's a huge problem in that it's a political process. It's not designed to be, and it definitely doesn't operate as a criminal trial that we expect from this same Constitution. The Constitution in a criminal trial says you have a trial of 12 of your peers, and the laws are set up so those 12 people who are saying you're innocent or guilty are supposed to be impartial, neutral, and decide only on the facts of the case. Clearly an impeachment trial, and the impeachment itself in the House of Representatives, it's political and not just on the evidence. The framers did their best. Framers were concerned about this. Framers knew there'd be elements of pure politics in it. But also, I'm not sure the framers really understood in 1787 how powerful party politics would become. Remember, they had some idea, particularly George Washington, where they would try to avoid party politics. George Washington famously warns us, whatever you do, don't do this party politics thing. But yes.
It just makes me wonder what else presidents could get away with. Because basically I feel like anything could be argued. I don't even think the argument matters as long as there's political parties. Nothing a president could do, they're never going to be impeached for. I can't see it unless there's a video recording of them literally murdering someone.
Yes, and that I think is a valid concern. So you really, for good or ill, you really have to look at the impeachment process as a political process. It is not an impartial trial because, yes, in the impeachments we have done, They've been decided on party lines and probably not on evidence. This one, this most latest one with President Trump, is really the only one when any significant number of people crossed party lines. So the 7 Republican senators this time, this trial, did say the Republican president was guilty, and that's new. And in previous impeachments, Clinton or Johnson were decided on party line votes. Clinton's impeachment, every Democratic senator said he was not guilty. Every Republican senator said he was guilty. So Clinton was found not guilty because there was a Democratic majority in the Senate. And this one, part 2, because remember, Trump has had 2 impeachments and 2 impeachment trials. Part 2, we did have some number of Republican senators said he was guilty this time. And yes, people are saying it didn't matter what evidence was presented because you probably weren't going to get enough Republican senators to vote guilty. I don't know. But again, now you're just talking about the problems of party politics in our system. And yes, that goes through all these issues, not just something as specific as impeachment and impeachment trials. 25th Amendment. All my stuff is on Plan Book. A lot of great information on this slide. Check it out on the slideshow. Questions?
No.